The 6.1, combining supply and demand. So the review from the last chapter, the demand schedule, it shows how much of a good a consumer is willing to buy, while the supply schedule shows how much the firms are willing to sell at different prices. This section talks about equilibrium, and that's where supply and demand meet in the middle. And when equilibrium is there, the market for a good is stable. So the chart over there, at $2, or selling the pizza at $1.50, the demand and the supply is equal, so that's the equilibrium. Later on, it'll talk about disequilibrium, which creates either a shortage or surplus. And during this time, the prices are flexible because they want to get to the equilibrium point. The shortage is when the quantity demanded in a market is more than the quantity supplied. So this is when people want to buy things because they're super cheap, but the sellers can't keep up with the amount that people want to buy. So back here, this is when the people want, for 50 cents, the people want 300 when they can only supply 100. A surplus, on the other hand, is when there's an excessive supply of something. This is when the prices are super high and you don't want to buy anything. It exists when quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. So price ceiling is a maximum price that can be legally charged for a good or service. This is set below the equilibrium price. So when this happens, most of the time a shortage occurs, and it is placed on some goods that are considered essential but might be too expensive for some consumers. One example of this is rent control. It's when there is a price placed on apartments it's to prevent inflation during a housing crisis. So in your book, on page 136, this chart is here, and it kind of explains the rent control a little bit more. And the supply and demand curves for the 2-bedroom house apartments, this is the equilibrium without, and the rent is $900 per month. So, but with rent control, at 600, people are going to want to buy it more, and they can only supply a certain amount that's not going to reach the equilibrium point. So price floors, on the other hand, is a minimum price set by the government that must be paid for a good or service, and they're set to ensure that certain sellers receive at least a minimum reward for their efforts. One example of this is minimum wage. So if it's set above the market equilibrium wage rate, the demand for workers will decrease, so they can't set it too high. But if it's set below the equilibrium rate, it won't have any effect. Alrighty. On your packet, or your review packet, I'm just going to go through the answers. So number 1, what is balanced at the market equilibrium price? That's supply and demand. Number 2, how equilibrium is shown on a supply and demand graph. It's where the demand curve and the supply curve intersects. The 2 possible outcomes of disequilibrium is the shortage or a surplus, which is the excess demand or excess supply. Supplier price responses to excess demand. The suppliers will raise their prices until the demand equals supply, which equals equilibrium. Number 5, condition under which market forces will push the market towards equilibrium. If the market is in disequilibrium with the flexible prices, that's when it'll go back towards equilibrium. The purpose of rent control is 1, to prevent inflation, to reduce the quality and quantity, and it helps the renters meet their needs. The impact of ending rent control. The supply will never meet demand, so it won't ever reach equilibrium with the rent control ending. Number 8, effect on labor when minimum wage exceeds equilibrium. It'll cause a decrease in employment. Number 9, how government provides price supports to the farms. They have a subsidy that guarantees farmers or a certain price for their goods. Number 10, when government wants to ensure that the essential goods or services within the reach of all consumers, it may impose a price ceiling. 11, if prices rise too high, a market may face a problem of excess supply. 12, if car manufacturers produce more or fewer cars than the consumer will buy, the car market will be in disequilibrium. Number 1, what factors affect prices? It's supply, demand, government intervention, and shortage and surplus also do. For number 2, describe how a specific buying decision that you might make could affect the price of an item. So if like something is out of date, you're less likely to buy it, but it also is like cheaper, so it would be like buying a DVD. Number 3, under what conditions is a market at equilibrium? It's when quantity supplied and quantity demand are equal. Number 4, identify 2 conditions that can lead to disequilibrium in a free market. It would be when market price or quantity supplied are too high or low. Number 5, A, is when supply exceeds demand, what happens to the prices? The prices go down. For B, how will the market return to equilibrium? By making the prices, like rising them up. 6, identify 2 ways the government can intervene to control prices. They can impose price ceilings or price floors, which is the rent control and minimum wage. What is the purpose of minimum wage? It is so that people can meet the standard of living